everyone. So this would be our pre-recorded video for the discussion on lesson 2, which is classification of property of matter. So without further ado, let's start our discussion. So as you can see in this illustration, it shows that matter can be physically separated by the means of two division. We have mixtures and pure substance. Yes, matter can be physically separated by the means of mixtures. How? Of course, by the means of its composition or uniformity. So, how can we identify or how can we classify its composition by the two? Of course, division of mixtures, which is homogeneous mixtures, which is particularly in solution, and heterogeneous mixtures, which is particularly in colloids and suspension. So later on, we will be discuss it furthermore. Matter also can be classified or can be physically separated not only by mixtures but also by pure substances. It can be separated by the means, or it can be chemically decomposed by the means of compound and elements. So we will be discussing again this furthermore, this two division or two types of classification of matter. So this illustration can actually describe or show how matter can be physically separated by the means of composition, which is the uniformity of it, and by the means of chemical decompose. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So today, our focus would be the classification of the properties and the changes of matter. With that, let's define first what is property. Of course, property is a distinguishing characteristics of a substance that is used in its identification and description. So to be more specific, when we say property, it can be characterized with the trait that can use to describe matter by the means of what? By the means of observation, measurement, or combination. So that is the meaning of property. So again, to clarify it, property is a characteristic or a trait that we can use to describe matter by observation, measurement, or combination. So one type of property, of course, is physical property. It's said that physical property is the characteristic of substance that can be observed without changing the basic identity of a substance. So let's explain it further. When we say physical property kasi, it focuses on density, color, hardness, melting, and boiling points, or even the electrical conductivity of a matter. So always remember that physical property can be described in what? By the means of not involving in its manifestation of a chemical change. So meaning in physical property, there is no such thing called, or no process called chemical change. So you will be identifying the physical property by its density, by its color, hardness, melting, and boiling point, and of course, even though the electrical conductivity you can possess, or you can describe it as a physical property. So let's explain it furthermore by its examples. Of course, let us study the physical properties of some materials below. As you can see, the examples are eventually giving the characteristics of a certain matter or a certain substance. Let's say gold. Gold is a solid, malleable, and has density of 19.3 gram per ml. So what was your observation with this? It said that the substance is actually being described by its physical appearance. Okay, by its physical appearance, and of course, it also described by its density. Kaya nga sinabi ko kanina that physical properties are involved with density. Okay, so let's proceed to another example. Table salt. Table salt is crystalline, white, salty, and soluble in water. As you can see, it's actually a description also by what? By a taste. So you can describe the physical property in a process so-called taste. So table salt, of course, from the appearance, physical appearance of table salt, which is crystalline, white, you can see it eventually by the color. As I've said, one of the physical property includes color. So these examples identify or describe that one. So it's actually said that it is soluble in water. So eventually, you can identify it by its physical appearance nga sinasabi ko at its color. So that was the explanation of the example 2. For the third example, we have alcohol. Alcohol is a liquid and is miscible with water. Of course, when we say miscible, you can not be seen in a certain, included in when you combine it with a certain substances, right? Alcohol, if you combine it to water, you cannot see the presence of alcohol. So, by that, you can identify the physical properties of alcohol by the means of it is a liquid. Okay, so that was the explanation, or that was the examples of physical property. So if you have some questions, clarifications, you can leave questions in our GC. Okay, let's move forward. So, to be specific on how to classify or on how to describe physical property, there are different materials to use that one. Number one is mass. Of course, you can identify or you can describe physical properties by the means of mass. How? By the amount of matter, sorry. So by the amount of matter, you can eventually describe the physical property of a certain matter. Aside from mass, we also have density. Kaya nga sinabi ko kanina that you can describe physical property by the means of density. When we say density, it's defined as the mass of an object per unit volume. So density explains how the mass or how the object will be specific gives the measurement of a certain property. And and let me ask, where does density use? So of course, densities are widely used to identify pure substances and to characterize and estimate the composition of many kinds of mixtures. That is why I've said that in density, it focuses on the totality of a certain matter, or the totality of a certain measurement of a matter. Kasi when we compare it to mass, mass eventually explains is the amount only, the amount of a certain matter, but the totality of it explains in density. So now let's proceed to another materials. We have brittleness. Of course, physical property can be described in brittleness. How? Because brittleness is the tendency of a material to break when a small force is applied. Okay, to explain it further, when we say brittleness, it is actually a material that characterized by a little deformation, poor capacity to resist impact and vibration of load, high compressive strength, and low tense of strength. So, what are those examples of brittleness? Of course, brittleness are those materials have a small plastic region and they begin as actually to fail toward a fracture or rupture almost immediately after being stressed beyond their elastic limit. So one of the examples of brittle materials are those concrete, ceramic, cast iron, bone. So that was actually the example of brittle materials. So now let's proceed to another slide for another materials. So aside from brittleness, mass, and density, we can eventually describe also a physical property by the means of it, ductility. So ductility is the ability of material to be drawn into thin wire. Okay, to explain it further, when we say ductility kasi, it can be measured or observed without the substance undergoing a chemical change. That's why I've said it is one included in physical property because there is no process called chemical change. And also, let's be reminded that ductility is the ability of a solid material to stretch under a tensile stress. For example of it, as I've said, metal that has been stretched into a wire is called as ductility. Okay, aside from ductility, we also have malleability. When we say malleability or malleable, being malleable, it is the ability of a metal to be hammered or shaped into thin sheets without breaking or cracking. So to be explained it further again, it is the property of a metal to deform under compression and take on a new shape. So that was malleability. So malleable property also the ability of a metal to be distorted below compression. So literally, it is a physical property that the physical property of a metal by which they can be hammered. Again, as I said, they can be hammered or shaped. A malleable, for example, a malleable fabric could be planate by a blow or rolling. So that was the malleability, or that was the ability of having so-called malleable. Okay, one of an example of malleable or the ability of malleable is a piece of wood. When a piece of wood, when a piece of wood is actually being hammered, it can produce or reshape as a piece of wood. So that was the example of malleable or malleability. Why? Because when the piece of wood is actually being hammered, it can produces or it can be reshaped. So in that case, you are producing or you are describing a certain ability which is called malleability. Okay, always remember when we say malleability or malleable, it is ability of matter to be hammered or shaped into thin sheet without breaking or cracking it. So let's proceed to another one. Another materials that can be described as physical properties. We have conductivity. As I've said a while ago, physical properties can be described not only by density, not only by malleability, by ductility, and so on and so forth, but also it can be described also by the means of electrical conductivity. When we say electrical conductivity or conductivity, it is the ability of some materials to conduct heat or electricity. So let's explain it again further. So when we say conductivity kasi, it is extend or it allows an electric current to flow through it. So basically, when we say conductivity, it is ability of a solution or a substance to transfer it to an electrical current. So, yan nga yung sinasabi ko that physical properties can also be described not only by the means of its appearance or physical appearance, but by also it can be described by its conductivity, on how a certain substances can produce a certain electricity or can produce a certain heat. Okay? Not only by producing, also by conducting. Okay, so now let's proceed to another physical property or another materials on describing physical property, which is luster. So luster is a property of material that pertains to interaction of a light on the surfaces of a metal. So how can we identify luster? So literally, we can identify luster in the means on how the surface of a material reflects a light. So meaning, if a certain substance is shiny or it has been producing a certain light, meaning it has a ability which is called as luster. So meaning that substance is particularly showing a physical property. Okay, so next slide, let's proceed to another, or let's move forward to another slide. So aside from mass, density, what those malleability, ductility, density, and also brittleness, we also have called a process solubility. So we can define or we can describe physical property by the means of solubility. Solubility is a property of a substance to dissolve in a solid, liquid, and gas. Okay, so by the means of the definition, you can eventually ask something that why solubility is not a chemical property, ma'am? Why it is included as a physical property? Why? Because solubility can be determined by a simple observation and does not change the chemical composition of the materials. That's why I've said when there is a chemical change, meaning you are showing a chemical property. But the differences kasi with chemical and physical property always show always show the substance without changing its chemical composition. Always remember that one. So that's why solubility is in the physical property kasi it observed naman a simple changes, not in a means of chemical composition. Hindi naman ginagalaw ni solubility yung chemical composition ng a certain substance. Okay? So let's proceed to another form that can eventually describe physical property, which is boiling point. So boiling point also can be described in a physical property kasi there is no changes again in chemical composition. Only you can do it by boiling point or by heating a certain substance. So when we say boiling point, it is the temperature at which a substance change from liquid to gas. Again, there is no such thing as a chemical composition to be observed in here kasi the process lang naman is boiling point, or you will be boiling a certain substance to produce a another process. Okay, like for example, when you change a liquid to a gas. Okay, let's proceed again to another. Aside from boiling point, we also have a melting point. So again, there is no changes naman kasi in physical appearance when you melt something, right? So meaning it includes again in physical property kasi there is no changing in chemical composition. So one of the example of melting point is when you melt a certain ice. So probably ice, the composition of ice is a water. So kaya lang siya naging water because you've stored it in a refrigerator and it become an ice. But eventually if you let the ice go in outside, magme-melt siya. Pero hindi pa rin magbabago yung chemical composition or hindi pa rin magbabago yung appearance niya kasi it's also water. So that means that melting point includes in physical property. Okay? So did you understand? So if you have any clarification or questions, you can leave it in our GC. Okay, let's proceed to another slide. We are not done yet because another material that can be described as a physical property is hardness. As I've said kanina naman, yung the introduction ko, that density, hardness, and color is one of the description on how can we describe a certain physical property. So hardness is the property of solid in a material to resist compression or scratching. Yes. So by the means of hardness, you can eventually describe the physical property or the physical appearance of a certain substance. So there is no more question with regards to hardness kasi it's very fact, it's very understandable naman that once you can eventually see a substance that is hard, so meaning you are describing a physical property. Okay, let's proceed to another materials that can be described as a physical property. We have miscibility. Okay, when we say miscibility, it is the ability of a liquid to dissolve in another liquid. So one of the example of it, and of course, is alcohol. When alcohol is being combined in water, of course, you can see that there is so-called process dissolve. So when a certain liquid can be dissolved in another liquid, there is the presence of miscibility is there. So another example is salt or sugar. When a sugar and salt can be combined in liquid, it can be eventually dissolved. So that process is called miscibility, and that miscibility can be described as physical property. Okay? Understand? So let's proceed to another form. We have volume. So kanina, we discussed mass and density. Of course, we also have volume. Bakit? Kasi eventually we can discuss, or we can explain that a certain matter can occupy space and also has a volume. So you can eventually describe that by the means of physical property when you are describing the matter by the means of volume. Bakit? Nararamdaman or nahahawakan naman. So, literally in physical property, it's eventually concluded in your senses again. If you can taste it, you can touch it, eventually it describes the physical appearance or physical property of a matter. That's why volume is included in describing the physical property. Okay? Let's have also taste. Kaya nga sinabi ko kanina, or the example which is the salt. Salt is salty, or the salt can be described as crystalline at it is salty. How can you describe that one? By the means of taste. If the material or if the substance is sweet, sour, saltiness, bitterness, and of course umami flavor, you can eventually include that one in describing the physical appearance or the physical property of a certain substance. And aside from taste, we also have odor. So odor is the perceive small of an object identified by the olfactory receptors of a humans and animals. Of course, hindi lang pala ang physical appearance or physical property, hindi lang pala siya natatapos sa pag-taste mo or sa pagtikim mo with a certain substance. Hindi pala siya natatapos doon. We can eventually describe also physical property pala by the means of odor, by the means of the smell of the substance. If we can eventually describe that one, it shows as a physical property. Okay? So I hope you understand so far my discussion today. So let's proceed to another slide. So lastly, we have color. Of course, as I've said in my introduction, one of description of being physical, or if you can describe it in a physical property, is a color. So, color is perceived in the light receptors of the eyes. Yes, kaya nga sinabi ko na it's not only by the taste, not only by the odor, but also in color. Once you can describe it in a certain color, once you can identify that with a certain color, you can eventually know that you are having a physical property, or you are showing the process which is called physical property. Okay? So, if you have a question and clarification again, you can visit our GC and ask a question. Okay, thank you. So now let's proceed now let's move forward to another slide. Okay. So, hindi pa dyan nagtatapos. Physical properties also can be either intensive properties or extensive properties. So, let's define or let's compare and let's give it a differences between the two division of physical properties. So let's have extensive properties. Extensive properties are properties that do not depend on the amount of matter present or being measured. To be exact, an example, of course, color, taste, odor, brittleness, density, specific gravity, boiling point, and freezing point. So eventually, when we say intensive properties, kasi it depends on, it is not depend on the amount of matter present or being measured. So eventually, it focuses only on the color, on the taste, on the odor, on the brittleness, density, specific gravity, or boiling point or freezing point of a certain substance. Okay, so I know you are now asking why density is included in intensive property. Simple, because density is a narrow range of densities across the sample, or let me explain it further. When we say kasi density, there is no matter what the initial mass was. So density were essentially the same. So even though you calculated it, or even though there is so-called, you can have the density, magiging the same pa rin siya sa kalalabasan. So that's mean that it is included in intensive property kasi there is no such thing called being measured. Okay? So, now let's proceed to another slide. So let's have, of course, another sample, or another division of physical property, which is extensive property. Extensive property are properties that depends on the amount of matter presented or being tested. So it's very different with intensive property kasi by the means of this explanation, that intensive properties is not depend on the amount of the matter, or the measurement of the amount of matter, while the extensive property is dependent on the amount of matter presented or being tested. So what are the example of it? Of course, the volume, mass, length, shape, weight, width, thickness, area, height, or even those SI units that included in measurement. So that is extensive property. So I hope you can now differentiate the both intensive and the both extensive. Always remember that extensive, guys, is depend on the amount of the matter presented or being tested, or it is depend about the measurement. When we say intensive, it is not dependent on the amount, or not dependent on the measurement of a certain matter. Okay? So I hope now you understand the differences between extensive and intensive properties. Okay, let's move forward to another slide. So now we are done discussing the physical properties and also the division of it, and also those forms or materials that can describe eventually, or that can explain on how physical property goes or works. So now let's move on, or let's move forward now to another division of matter, or to another classification of matter, which is chemical property. Okay? Chemical property is characteristic of a substance that can be observed with changing the basic identity of the substance. It is characteristic of a substance that describe the way the substance undergoes or resists change to form new substance. It also involves transformation. By the keyword transformation, it is chemical property. So it involves also transformation of a substance into other material which possess a completely different structure and composition from the original. So from the definition itself, you can eventually explain that chemical property is a so-called process which certain substance evolve, or certain substance transform to another substance. It possess a completely different structure. Always remember that one. That once the substance will transform, meaning it possesses completely different structure and composition. Ibang-iba na siya from the original composition. So that's why it explains the process of chemical property. Okay, let's proceed, or let's explain it further by the next slide. So if the physical property can explain or have a form or materials that describe how physical property form or works, of course chemical property also have. Okay, one of the form that can eventually describe how chemical property can be worked is flammability. Of course, in flammability, the ability of matter to be burned, of course, the composition would be literally changed. Kaya nga, when a piece of paper, let me have an example. When you cut a piece of paper in a different sizes, or if you cut the piece of paper in a different sizes, eventually you are having a physical property, right? Kasi wala namang nangyayari. It's the same. The composition, the structure of it, it's the same. It's paper. But when your paper or you burn your paper, eventually it change its composition and structure. Anong mangyayari sa kanya? Magiging abo na yung paper, right? So by the means of burning, by the means of flammability, you are showing the chemical property. Okay, I hope you understand now the differences between physical and chemical properties. So one of the another form of showing or describing chemical properties is reactivity. Reactivity is the ability of matter to chemically combine with another. So let me explain it further to you. So meaning, when we say reactivity, it is a measurement of how, or it is measure of how readily a substance undergoes a chemical reaction, on how a certain substance react to another substance. Meaning, if you combine the substance to another substance, it will produces a reaction, and that reaction possesses reactivity. Yan. So I hope you understand now the two major forms on chemical properties. We have flammability and reactivity. So now let's proceed to another. We have rusting. Rusting is the ability of some chemical properties of matter to rush. Okay, one of the example of rusting or the process rusting, it occurs actually when an iron, di ba? Alam niyo naman what is iron? Iron combines with the oxygen in the air, causing it to corrode. So meaning there is a process so-called rusting. Why? Because the iron now and the oxygen is forming a corrosion. So, meaning to say, it goes by a chemical reaction that affects masses of the iron and steel. So, once it's formed, rust begins to eat away at the metal, forming or it occurs again the metals to react with oxygen. So, that is the means of rusting, or the ability of some chemical properties of matter to rush. So now, that was actually the description or the form on how to describe chemical properties. So again, how can you describe chemical properties? By the means of flammability, reactivity, and last, rusting. So I hope you understand my discussion for this for chemical property. So if you have a question again, you can leave it in our GC. Okay, then I will be entertaining you guys. So now let's proceed to another slide. So for another topic for this afternoon, I have changes in matter. Of course, we can classify also matter by its changes. So not only by its properties, but also by its changes. What are those? We have physical change and chemical change. Okay, so as I've said, not only by property, we can also be classify the matter by the means of changes. So, you will be asking me, Ma'am, what are the differences between properties and changes? Of course, there is no difference of it. Once there is no changes, it includes physical properties. Again, the differences, there is no differences between changes and property. Why? Because if the substance has no changes, it includes in physical change, and it categorized in physical properties. And if the substance has a change or has a process which is called changes, it is a chemical change that categorize it into chemical property. So I hope you now know what are the difference or what are the similarities. No with the difference kasi wala naman silang difference. Similarities between physical property and physical change, and chemical property and chemical change. So now let's define what is physical change. Physical change is a process in which a substance changes its physical appearance but not its chemical composition. Like I've said nga, how does physical change occur when a piece of paper when you cut a piece of paper in different sizes, you can eventually describe it as a physical change. But if you burn the paper, the chemical composition now can be different. So you are now showing a chemical change. With that, let's define first what is chemical change. Chemical change is a chemical reaction. Here, there is a dramatic change in the chemical and or physical properties of a substance involved before and after the reaction. So, as you can read, dramatic change. So, yun na nga, my example is a piece of paper. Once the piece of paper is cut into different sizes, it shows physical change. How? Kasi nag-change lang siya with the physical appearance but not chemically. But if you burn the paper, you are now showing the different chemical composition of the paper. Then that is includes in chemical change. So I hope you now understand what is the differences between physical change and chemical change. So now let's proceed to another slide. So there are indicators of chemical change. Those indicators may include all or some of the following. We have evolution of gases, formation of precipitate, change in some intrinsic properties such odor, color, and taste, and of course, release or absorption of energy like heat or light. Okay, for the indicators, it is actually an example on how can you locate or how can you classify the acidity or basicity of a substance. And acidity and basicity of a substance is included in chemical change. Why? Because, as I've said, it includes a changes in composition or a structure. So how can you indicate or how can you classify the acidity and basicity of a certain substance? By the means of indicators. And what are those indicators? We have evolution of gases, formation of precipitate, change in some intrinsic properties such odor, color, and taste, and of course, release or absorption of energy like heat or light. Okay, so that's it. That explains the chemical or that explains the indicators of chemical change. To summarize it or to give you a brief or summarized explanation about the differences between physical and chemical change, let me show you this illustration. As you can see here, in a physical change, matter changes from but not chemical identity. What do you mean by matter changes form? It is eventually said that it can be changed physical appearance but cannot be changed in chemical composition. By the means of that, we have example melting ice, chopping a wood, mixing gray and green marbles, of course. Shredding paper. Yun na nga sinasabi ko, once you shred a piece of paper, wala naman magbabago eh. It is the same. It is a paper. Once you melt an ice, it is the same. It is a water. Once you cut a wood, it is the same again. It is a wood. Even though the difference, ang nag-change lang sa kanya is yung physical appearance niya na it evolves to another sizes. But with the chemical composition of it, hindi naman nagbago eh. Wala namang nagbago sa itsura, may nagbago sa itsura, pero wala namang nagbago sa chemical composition niya. Or meaning yung pagiging, or walang nag-evolve na certain process like burning, rusting, wala. So that is physical changes. Eventually, you can identify that you are having a process like physical properties, physical changes once you look the object or once you look the substance. By mixing gray and green marbles, you can eventually identify the gray and green by it. So, hindi naman nag-change yung chemical composition niyan. Kasi yung process na ginawa mo is only for mixing. So, another change, we have chemical changes. Of course, in chemical changes, a chemical reaction occurs, new products are formed. So, in this process, we are include in such called process like flammability, burning, rusting, reactivity. One of the example of it, burning of wood. Yes, from the wood itself, magiging ashes na naman siya. So eventually, you can define or you can give another structure of a wood. Of course, rotting banana, another structure of it. mixing vinegar and baking soda. Why? Because there are a reaction of that process. And of course, fireworks. Reactivity again is there. So that explains the changes of chemical change. Okay? So this illustration now give you the brief or summarization of the two types of change, which is physical changes and chemical changes. So I hope you understand now our discussion for today. This will end my pre-recorded video. If you have questions, clarifications, or violent reactions with regards to the video, you can tell it to our GC, or you can leave a comment, or you can leave a feedback to our GC. Okay, thank you very much, and see you on our next virtual class. Goodbye, everyone.